He had signed billion-dollar contracts without his hands shaking. He had faced courtrooms, boardrooms, and headlines that could destroy empires. But nothing in Alexander Wright's life had prepared him for this. 6 children, not scattered, not accidental, standing together like they belonged to the same story. 3 girls, 3 boys, some with skin as light as his, some the color of warm earth. Different faces, different energies. Yet when they looked at him, the truth was undeniable. The same eyes, the same stillness, the same quiet way of observing before speaking. Something tightened in Alexander's chest. Not fear, not confusion, recognition, the kind that needs no proof. A woman stood behind them, calm and unwavering. She didn't accuse him. She didn't reach for him. She only said the words that shattered everything. They're yours. In that moment, Alexander understood the truth. Power had never been his greatest test. Money had never been his greatest responsibility. These 6 children were. And once he stepped toward them, there was no returning to the man he used to be. Alexander Wright had learned, over the years, how to move through rooms without truly being in them. Boardrooms, galas, charity events carefully curated by public relations teams who knew exactly which angle of his face translated best into generosity. He smiled when required, shook hands when expected, listened just long enough to respond with precision. His life had become a sequence of controlled appearances, each moment measured, optimized, contained. This afternoon was no different. The community center on the south side of Chicago was warm, a little worn around the edges, its walls painted in hopeful colors that had faded unevenly with time. The air carried the mixed scents of crayons, disinfectant, and something sweet baking somewhere nearby. Children's laughter echoed down the hallway in unpredictable bursts, sharp and bright in a way that cut through Alexander's usual mental armor. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket, faintly aware of how out of place he looked. This won't take long, his assistant had assured him earlier. A short visit, photos with the kids, a few remarks. Then we're done. Alexander had nodded. He always did. Yet when he stepped into the activity room, something inside him slowed. Children sat on the floor in loose clusters, some drawing, some building towers from mismatched blocks, others simply talking in voices too earnest to be background noise. A few glanced up at him with curiosity, then returned to their games, unimpressed by the presence of a man whose name moved markets. And then he saw her, a little girl, no older than 6, sat cross-legged near the window, carefully coloring within the lines of a picture she seemed determined to perfect. Her hair light brown, almost blonde where the sun caught it, fell forward as she leaned in close. There was a seriousness to her posture that felt oddly familiar. She lifted her head. For a fraction of a second, Alexander forgot how to breathe. The resemblance was not dramatic. It wasn't the exaggerated kind that invited laughter or coincidence. It was subtler, more unsettling. The shape of her eyes, the set of her mouth when she concentrated, the way her gaze didn't flit, but held steady, thoughtful, assessing, like his own had. At that age, before the world had taught him to hide it, he told himself it meant nothing. Children often resembled adults. Patterns repeated. Genetics played tricks on perception. He had spent his life trusting data, not feelings. He took a step forward, intending to move past the moment, to rejoin the staff member waiting to introduce him. That was when another child ran toward the girl. Then another. And another. 5 more gathered around her, drawn by some invisible gravity, their energy colliding in a small, chaotic orbit. Alexander's gaze followed them, almost against his will. 6 children, 3 girls, 3 boys. They were not identical. Their skin tones varied, some light, some a warm, deeper brown. Their hairstyles differed. One boy was already scowling at a loose block tower, arms crossed in defiance. A girl beside him whispered something that made the youngest giggle. But Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him, because now he saw it. The same eyes, repeated in different shades, the same line of the jaw, the same quiet watchfulness beneath the noise of childhood. Recognition struck him with a force that bypassed logic. His pulse quickened. His hands that had signed mergers, fired executives, closed deals in moments of ruthless clarity, felt strangely unsteady. This was not coincidence. A staff member approached, smiling brightly. Mr. Wright, these are some of the children who benefit from the scholarship program you funded last year. Alexander barely heard her. The children were looking at him now, not with awe, not with fear, with curiosity, as if they were studying him the same way he was studying them. One of the boys the tallest, his skin a rich brown. His expression guarded, tilted his head slightly. The movement was so familiar, it sent a sharp ache through Alexander's chest. He had done that countless times when something didn't quite add up. A girl with lighter skin and tightly braided hair tugged gently at the sleeve of the girl from the window. "He looks like you," she whispered. Not quietly enough. The girl frowned, considering Alexander seriously. "No," she said after a moment. "He looks like all of us." The words landed softly, and yet they struck harder than any accusation ever had. Alexander felt the room narrow. The sound of laughter dulled, as if someone had turned down the volume of the world. Kids say the funniest things. The staff member laughed nervously, unaware of the quiet catastrophe unfolding inches away. Alexander forced himself to smile. It felt wrong on his face. Before he could respond, a woman entered the room. She did not rush. She did not scan the space anxiously, the way parents often did. She moved with calm purpose, her presence subtle but unmistakable, like a steady current beneath restless water. She stopped when she saw him, and for the first time since Alexander had entered the building, someone else in the room truly saw him. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition of a different kind. History, compressed into a single breath. Naomi Carter had not changed in the ways that mattered. Her hair was pulled back simply, curls framing her face. Her skin glowed softly under the fluorescent lights, deep and warm, grounding. Her expression was composed, but her eyes, those eyes held a depth Alexander had never forgotten. Intelligence, restraint, and a quiet strength that had once undone him completely. Time folded in on itself. New York, late nights, conversations that stretched until dawn, the kind of connection that felt dangerous, precisely because it demanded honesty. She walked toward the children, instinctively positioning herself just behind them, protective, present, the way she always had been. Naomi, Alexander said, her name escaping him before he had time to decide whether to speak. Her lips parted slightly, then curved into the smallest of smiles. Not affectionate, not cold, just real. Alexander, she replied. The children sensed the shift immediately. They turned toward her, each one instinctively close, some reaching for her hand, others simply leaning back until they felt her there. Alexander watched the way she rested her palm lightly on the shoulder of one boy, how another child leaned into her leg without looking. The ease of it twisted something deep inside him. He had built companies from nothing. He had mastered systems, hierarchies, power. But this belonged to a world he had never entered. Naomi studied his face, then glanced at the children, then back at him again. There was no triumph in her expression, no resentment, only inevitability. They've been asking about you, she said quietly. Alexander's breath caught. About me? She nodded once. They didn't know your name, just that someone was missing. The words hollowed him out. He looked at the 6 children again, at the way they mirrored him and contradicted him all at once, at the lives that had existed entirely beyond his awareness. What are they to you? He asked, though some part of him already knew the answer. Naomi held his gaze steadily. She did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize the moment. They're yours, she said. No echo followed, no dramatic music, just the quiet hum of a building filled with children and borrowed hope. Alexander felt the future tilt. In that instant, he understood something with startling clarity. Everything he had built, every tower of glass and steel, every carefully measured success, had been preparation for a moment he never planned for. 6 children stood between him and the man he had always been. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Wright had no idea how to move forward. But somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the shock, beneath the unraveling of control, something else stirred. Not power, not ambition. A fragile, terrifying pull toward something that might finally matter more than himself. And he knew without question that once he stepped closer, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after Naomi's words did not feel empty. It felt crowded, filled with everything Alexander had not said, had not known, had not chosen. They're yours. The sentence lingered between them, suspended in the ordinary hum of the community center. A child laughed somewhere down the hall. A chair scraped softly against the floor. Life, apparently, had no intention of stopping to accommodate his unraveling. Alexander swallowed. His throat felt tight, as if his body were bracing against something it did not yet understand. Naomi did not rush him. She never had. That, he remembered, had always been both her gentlest and most infuriating trait. She waited not passively, but with the quiet confidence of someone who trusted the truth to hold its own weight. The children were still watching him, not all in the same way. The tallest boy, dark-skinned, sharp-eyed, stood with his arms crossed, his stance defensive, skeptical. A girl beside him, lighter-skinned with carefully braided hair, studied Alexander with open curiosity, her head tilted slightly as if comparing him to something stored in memory. Another boy, pale and serious, avoided eye contact altogether, retreating inward with a book clutched to his chest, like a shield. Alexander noticed everything. He had always noticed everything. Except this. "Why don't we sit down?" Naomi said softly, sensing the precariousness of the moment. "The kids have had a long day." She guided them toward a low table near the window. The children obeyed easily, familiarity in their movements. Alexander followed more slowly, unsure of where he belonged in the arrangement. He chose a chair at the edge, acutely aware of his size, his presence, the contrast between his tailored clothes and the scuffed sneakers under the table. Naomi took a seat among the children, not apart from them. One of the girls leaned into her side. A boy rested his elbow against her knee without asking permission. Alexander felt a flicker of something dangerously close to envy. "They know about you," Naomi said, once everyone was settled. "In the abstract." Alexander exhaled slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means they know there was a man," she replied. "Someone intelligent, someone whose choices mattered, someone whose absence wasn't because he didn't care." Her eyes met his. There was no accusation there, just clarity. "They also know I didn't tell you," she continued, "and that I didn't do it lightly." Alexander nodded, though his mind was racing. 1,000 questions pressed at once, each one demanding priority. How, when, why now, why 6? But one question rose above the rest, quiet and terrifying. "What do they think of me?" Naomi glanced at the children. "That," she said, "depends on you." The tallest boy snorted softly. Naomi turned her head. "Marcus." He shrugged, unapologetic. "Just saying." Alexander looked at him. Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "You're rich," Marcus said plainly. "People like you don't stick around." The words were not cruel. They were practiced. Alexander felt their weight settle into him. "You're right," he said after a moment. "A lot of people like me don't." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised. "That doesn't mean I won't," Alexander added, carefully. Not promising, not performing, just stating intent. The girl with the braids leaned forward. "Are you famous?" she asked. Naomi sighed softly. "Lena." "It's okay," Alexander said. He looked at the girl. "Some people know my name." Lena considered this. "Does that mean you're busy all the time?" "Yes." He answered honestly. She nodded, as if confirming a theory. "Mom's busy too, but she always comes back." Alexander glanced at Naomi. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A younger girl, light-skinned. Her curls pulled into a loose ponytail, shifted closer to him. She studied his hands, resting on the table, large and still. "You look nervous," she said. A beat passed. "I am," Alexander admitted. Her face softened. "That's okay. I get nervous too when people stay." The words struck him harder than Marcus's skepticism. Stay. The concept felt enormous. Naomi stood. "I'm going to get them some juice," she said, offering Alexander a quiet exit if he wanted one. He shook his head. "I'll stay." She studied him for a brief moment longer, then nodded and walked away. The children watched her go, then turned back to him. For the first time, Alexander Wright, who had negotiated with governments, faced hostile takeovers. Dismantled competitors with precision felt entirely unarmed. He did not know how to speak to them. Not really. So he did what Naomi had always asked of him, even years ago. He told the truth. "I didn't know about you," he said. "Not because I didn't want to. Because someone made a choice I didn't get to be part of." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So you didn't leave?" "No," Alexander said. "But I also didn't come." The boy considered this carefully. The quiet boy with the book finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you like us?" Alexander frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The boy lifted his eyes, pale gray and searching. "Do you feel like you don't fit in places?" The question undid him. "Yes," Alexander said. "Almost everywhere." The boy nodded once and returned to his book, as if a conclusion had been reached. Naomi returned with drinks, her gaze flicking between Alexander and the children, measuring the subtle shift in the room. Something had changed. The walls were still there, but cracks had formed. "Time to go," she announced gently. There were murmurs of protest, groans, negotiations. Alexander watched as she herded them with practiced ease, collecting backpacks, smoothing hair, reminding them of homework and bedtime routines. This was not a role she performed. It was who she was. As they moved toward the door, the youngest girl, the one who had noticed his nerves, paused. She turned back to him. "Are you coming tomorrow?" she asked. Alexander hesitated. Tomorrow implied continuity, intention, a future. Naomi watched him closely, saying nothing. "Yes," he said finally. "If that's okay." The girl smiled, bright, unreserved. "Okay," she said, then ran ahead. Alexander stood there long after they left, the room suddenly too quiet. Naomi returned, folding her arms loosely. "You didn't have to say that." "I know," he replied, "but I meant it." She studied him with a familiar mixture of caution and hope. "This isn't something you can manage like a project." "Alexander." "I know," he said again. "Good," she said softly, "because they don't need perfection. They need presence." Alexander nodded, the truth of it settling deep. As he walked out into the fading afternoon light, he felt the shape of his life subtly, irrevocably changing. 6 children. 6 reflections of a man he thought he understood, and a future that no longer belonged to him alone. That night, Alexander did not return to his hotel right away. He drove instead. Chicago unfolded around him in long, glowing lines, traffic lights blinking like cautious thoughts, storefronts closing their metal shutters with finality. The city was loud, restless, alive. He had visited it dozens of times before, always passing through with purpose, always leaving unchanged. Tonight was different. His phone buzzed repeatedly, missed calls from his assistant, messages stacked with urgency, but he silenced it without reading them. For the first time in years, there was something more important than being reachable. Naomi. 6 children. Tomorrow. The word echoed in his mind with a strange mixture of fear and gravity. He parked along the river and sat in the car, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing in particular. His thoughts kept circling back, not to the children, but to the woman who had stood behind them with such quiet certainty. Naomi had always been like that, calm in ways that unsettled him, strong in ways that didn't announce themselves. He had loved her once, not in the way men like him often claimed to love through possession or proximity or convenience, but in a way that had frightened him. Naomi saw through his armor. She asked questions he couldn't deflect with intellect. She spoke about responsibility, not as an abstract concept, but as a daily practice. He had let her go, because staying would have required him to change. Now, change had found him anyway. The next morning arrived too quickly. Alexander stood outside Naomi's apartment building just after 8, coffee untouched in his hand. It was modest, brick-lined, tucked into a neighborhood that felt lived in rather than impressive. He imagined the children inside breakfast crumbs, mismatched socks, arguments over backpacks, a life that ran on rhythms he had never learned. He knocked. Naomi opened the door moments later, already dressed, her hair pulled back, expression unreadable. "You're early," she said. "I didn't sleep," he replied. She stepped aside, letting him in without comment. The apartment smelled faintly of toast and citrus cleaner. Sunlight spilled through the windows, illuminating a space filled with evidence of real-life drawings taped to the fridge. Shoes by the door. A half-finished science project on the table. The children were already gone. Naomi explained, ushered off to school by a neighbor she trusted. Alexander felt a pang of disappointment he hadn't expected. "They'll be back this afternoon," she said, reading his expression easily. "We should talk before then." He nodded. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The intimacy of the space made it impossible to retreat into formality. There was no boardroom distance here, no agenda, just truth. "I never wanted to tell you like this," Naomi began, folding her hands around her mug. "I wanted time, control, a plan." "I understand," Alexander said, and he did. She studied him carefully. "Do you?" "Yes," he replied quietly. "Because that's what I've built my life on, planning around risk, managing outcomes." Her lips curved slightly. "And how's that working for you now?" He exhaled, conceding the point. "Poorly." Silence settled, not awkward, but heavy with memory. "I didn't disappear because I stopped caring," Naomi said finally. "I left because I discovered something I couldn't undo." She told him everything. The research lab, the grant funding, the pressure to deliver results, how his DNA collected under the guise of routine testing for an unrelated study had been misused, how she had uncovered the truth too late. 6 embryos already viable, 6 futures already in motion. "I reported it," she said. "But institutions protect themselves. Not people, not children who don't exist yet." Alexander listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with each detail. Anger burned, sharp and precise, but beneath it lay something deeper. Guilt. "I should have known," he said quietly. "I built that system. I trusted the wrong people." Naomi shook her head. "This isn't about blame. It's about what happens next." He looked up. "You should have told me." She met his gaze steadily. "And then what?" He had no answer. "You were building an empire," she continued. You were becoming someone the world depended on. I didn't want my children to be leverage, or secrets, or collateral damage. My children, he repeated softly. Yes, Naomi said. Yours too. The words were simple, unyielding. Alexander leaned back, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how to do this. Naomi's expression softened. Neither did I. I learned. He looked at her then, not as the woman he had loved, but as the mother she had become. The weight she had carried alone, the nights she must have spent awake, worrying about futures she couldn't predict. You didn't take them from me, he said. You protected them. She blinked, surprised. I'm not angry. He continued. I'm late. Naomi smiled sadly. That you are. They heard the sound of keys at the door later that afternoon. Laughter followed. The children burst in with the unfiltered energy of the day behind them. Alexander stood, instinctively. They slowed when they saw him. Curiosity rekindled. You came back, Lena said. I said I would, he replied. Marcus eyed him carefully. Most people say things. I know, Alexander said. That's why I came. The youngest girl smiled and ran toward him, stopping just short, as if waiting for permission. Alexander hesitated only a moment before kneeling, lowering himself to her level. I'm glad you're here, she said. So am I, he answered, surprised by the truth of it. Naomi watched from the doorway, something quiet and unresolved shifting in her chest. This was not the reunion she had imagined years ago. There were no apologies dramatic enough to rewrite the past. No declarations that could simplify what lay ahead. But there was presence. And for the first time since she had walked away, Naomi allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the man she had once loved was finally ready to become someone new. Not a savior, not a solution, but a father. And perhaps, in time, something more. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came in layers, technical, procedural, disturbingly mundane. Alexander spent the next several days in Chicago, postponing meetings, canceling flights, allowing his carefully ordered calendar to fracture without protest. For the first time in years, the unraveling did not feel like failure. It felt necessary. Naomi gave him access to everything: documents, emails, encrypted files she had kept not as weapons, but as insurance proof that what had happened was real, deliberate, and buried under bureaucratic silence. They sat side by side at her kitchen table after the children went to sleep, the glow of a laptop illuminating the space between them. Alexander read slowly. He recognized names, institutions, protocols he himself had approved years earlier, trusting layers of compliance and ethical review that now revealed themselves as porous, compromised. His genetic material had been stored, cataloged, replicated under legal gray areas, disguised as innovation. It wasn't personal, Naomi said quietly, watching his face. That's the worst part. Alexander nodded. It never is. 6 embryos, 6 lives, generated not by love, not by choice, but by ambition, unchecked. This wasn't science, he said finally, his voice low. It was theft. Naomi closed the laptop. I tried to stop it. Once I understood the scope, I blew every whistle I could reach. They offered settlements, silence, career rehabilitation. And you walked away, with 6 heartbeats growing inside me. She replied simply. Alexander leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For years, he had defended the idea that progress required risk, that ethics could evolve alongside discovery, that harm was sometimes an unintended byproduct of advancement. Now, harm had names. Marcus, Lena, 6 sleeping children down the hall. I built this, he said. Naomi turned toward him. You built the system. You didn't choose what they did with it. That distinction doesn't feel meaningful anymore. She studied him carefully. That's because you're thinking like a father now, not a CEO. The word landed softly, but it reshaped the room. Father. Alexander had never imagined himself as one. Children had existed in his future only as abstract possibilities, something that might happen once everything else was complete. Once he had proven enough, earned enough, controlled enough. He looked down the hallway, where the children slept behind closed doors. They deserved better than an experiment. Yes, Naomi said. They did. The following days revealed another truth Alexander could not ignore. The children were watching him. Not openly, not eagerly, but attentively. Marcus tested boundaries with deliberate indifference, pushing limits to see whether Alexander would disappear the moment things grew uncomfortable. Lena asked questions, not just about his work, but about his childhood, his parents, his fears. The quiet boy Elliot observed everything without comment. His trust, something that would not be offered easily. The youngest girl, Emma, hovered near him often. Her presence gentle, curious, as if she sensed something unfinished between them. Alexander responded not with authority, but consistency. He showed up when he said he would. He listened more than he spoke. He learned names, preferences, fears. At night, when the apartment finally fell quiet, Naomi found herself watching him from the doorway more than once. Alexander sitting on the floor, assembling puzzles, reading stories in a voice still unsure of its role. You don't have to do this, she told him one evening after the children were asleep. Not all of it, not immediately. I know, he said, but I want to. She searched his face. Wanting isn't enough. I know. He repeated, but it's where I start. There was something painfully intimate about watching him try, about seeing a man who had never tolerated uncertainty surrender himself to it willingly. Naomi felt old emotions stir, not nostalgia, but recognition. This version of Alexander was unfamiliar, and yet closer to the man she had always believed he could be. One afternoon, Alexander took a call from his legal team. He stepped onto the small balcony, closing the door behind him, his expression hardening as he listened. Naomi caught fragments through the glass lawsuits. Exposure. Reputational risk. When he returned, his face was set. They want to bury it, he said. Again. Naomi folded her arms. Of course they do. They're offering to dismantle the remaining research quietly, to compensate affected parties, to keep my name clean, and the children she asked. They'd be classified as anomalies. He replied bitterly. Legal complexities. Naomi laughed softly. humorless. Of course they would. Alexander felt something in him settle heavy, immovable. "I won't let that happen," he said. She looked at him sharply. "Alexander." "I won't." He repeated. "Not again. Not to them." Naomi studied him for a long moment, weighing the cost of what he was about to do. "If you push this into the light, it will change everything. I know. You could lose control of your company. Yes, your board will turn on you. I expect them to. You'll be defined by this," she said quietly, not as a visionary, but as a man whose children forced the truth out. Alexander met her gaze steadily. "I'm comfortable with that." Silence stretched between them. Naomi exhaled slowly. "Then you're choosing them." "Yes," he said, finally. That night, after the children were asleep, Naomi joined him on the balcony. The city hummed below, distant and indifferent. "I spent years convincing myself you wouldn't choose us," she said softly. Alexander turned to her. "I didn't know how." She nodded. "I know." They stood there, close but not touching, the space between them charged with things unsaid. "This doesn't fix the past," she added. "I'm not trying to fix it," he replied. "I'm trying to be accountable to it." Naomi looked at him, then really looked. The arrogance that had once defined him had softened into resolve, the certainty into commitment, the ambition into something quieter, steadier. "You're not the man I left," she said. "No," Alexander agreed. "But I'm still becoming." A sound drifted from inside soft footsteps. Hesitant. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Bad dream," she murmured. Alexander didn't hesitate. He knelt, opening his arms instinctively. She stepped into them. Naomi watched as he held her careful, reverent, as if afraid of doing harm by mistake. Emma relaxed almost immediately, her small body trusting him without question. In that moment, Naomi felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not love reborn, but possibility. The sin of science had created these children, but what came next would be defined by choice. And for the first time, Alexander Wright was choosing something he could not control, only protect. Morning in Naomi's apartment arrived without ceremony. It came in the form of muffled footsteps, the clatter of a dropped spoon, an argument about whose turn it was to feed the fish. Alexander woke to the unfamiliar sound of life continuing without his permission, without regard for schedules or strategy. For the first time in years, he did not resent it. He stood in the doorway of the small kitchen, watching Naomi move through the space with quiet efficiency. She poured cereal, tied shoelaces, kissed foreheads, corrected grammar mid-sentence. The children orbited her instinctively, each one drawing from her in a different way. Alexander began to notice the differences. Marcus, the eldest boy, carried himself like someone who had learned early not to rely on adults. He was sharp, defensive, quick to challenge authority. His skin was deep brown, his gaze unflinching, his humor edged with something almost bitter. He tested Alexander constantly, not with words, but with silence, with refusal, with indifference. Lena, the girl with the braids, was perceptive beyond her years. She asked questions that landed like soft probes, searching for consistency. She remembered promises. She noticed when adults lied, even gently. Elliot, pale and reserved, disappeared into books and thoughts. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried weight. His trust would not be won through enthusiasm, but through patience. Noah, one of the darker-skinned boys, was restless, kinetic. His emotions always just beneath the surface. He laughed loudly, cried quickly, and bristled at any hint of dismissal. Ava, the girl with warm brown skin and expressive eyes, watched everything. She absorbed moods, mirrored tension, and retreated inward when the world felt too loud. And Emma, small, light-skinned, quietly brave, moved between them all, offering softness where others hardened. She was the one who reached out first, not because she understood more, but because she feared less. 6 children, 6 entirely separate worlds. Alexander realized quickly that treating them as a unit would be a mistake. They did not need a benefactor. They did not need a savior. They needed to be seen. The day unfolded in fragments: breakfast chaos, the hurried departure to school, Naomi's quiet instructions echoing down the stairwell. Alexander watched it all with a growing sense of humility. He had thought leadership meant command. He was learning that. In families, it meant attunement. When the apartment finally emptied, Naomi sank into a chair, exhaling. "You're observing," she said. "Yes," Alexander replied. "Don't forget to participate." He smiled faintly. "I'm working up to it." She laughed softly. "Careful. They'll notice." They did. That afternoon, Alexander picked them up from school. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the schoolyard, surrounded by parents who eyed him with polite curiosity, unaware of the internal reckoning taking place beneath his composed exterior. The children spotted him almost immediately. Emma waved enthusiastically. Marcus slowed. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked bluntly once they reached him. "I said I would be," Alexander replied. Marcus considered him for a long moment, then shrugged. Okay. It was not approval, but it was acknowledgement. On the walk home, Lena peppered him with questions about his work, not impressed, just curious. Elliot lagged behind, his attention fixed on a book. Noah kicked pebbles into the street, daring Alexander to scold him. Alexander did not. Instead, he asked Noah why he was angry. The boy blinked, surprised by the question. "I'm not." Alexander nodded. "Okay." They walked on. That evening, Naomi watched from the kitchen as Alexander attempted to help with homework. He did not correct answers immediately. He asked how they arrived at them. He listened when Ava grew frustrated and shut down. He let Elliot explain things in his own time. "You don't talk to them like children," Naomi observed later. "I remember hating that," he replied. There were moments of friction. Marcus refused to eat dinner one night, pushing his plate away with deliberate force. Alexander resisted the urge to impose consequences. Instead, he asked why. Marcus's voice shook when he answered. "Because when people get close, they leave." The room went still. Alexander knelt beside him. "I can't promise perfection," he said quietly, "but I can promise honesty." Marcus did not respond, but he ate Another night. Ava had a nightmare. Naomi reached her first, but Ava clung to Alexander instead, trembling. He held her until her breathing slowed, his heart pounding with the weight of her trust. Later, Naomi sat beside him on the couch, her voice low. "They're not broken," she said. "They're adapting." "I know," Alexander replied. "So am I." He began to see the scars not as damage, but as evidence of resilience. Each child had found a way to survive the absence of a father. Now, they were testing whether his presence would be another variable they had to manage. He understood the test, and he accepted it. One evening, as the children slept, Naomi joined him on the balcony. The city glowed softly around them. "You're doing more than I expected," she admitted. "I'm doing less than I should have," he replied. She smiled sadly. "Regret is a luxury parents don't have." He turned to her. "Do you regret not telling me sooner?" Naomi considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally, "but I regret having to be strong alone." Alexander felt the weight of that truth settle into him. "I won't leave you to do this alone again," he said. Naomi studied him, her gaze searching, cautious. "You don't get to say that lightly." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm staying." There was no embrace, no dramatic confession, just two adults standing at the edge of something fragile and real. Inside, 6 children slept, each carrying their own fears, their own hopes, their own questions. Alexander understood now, loving them would not be a single decision. It would be 1,000 small ones, and he was ready to make every one. The house in California was everything people imagined when they heard Alexander Wright's name. Glass walls, clean lines, an infinity pool that blurred into the horizon, silence engineered into every corner by design. It had been featured in magazines, praised for its minimalism, admired for its restraint, and within 24 hours of the children's arrival, it felt painfully wrong. The first sign was the noise. Not laughter, not yet, but the unfamiliar sounds of footsteps echoing too loudly. Voices bouncing off high ceilings that were never meant to hold conversation. Emma's shoes squeaked against the polished floor. Noah ran his hand along the glass walls, leaving fingerprints that caught the light, like tiny acts of rebellion. "This place feels like a museum," Marcus muttered. Alexander heard him. So did Naomi. "It's temporary," Naomi said carefully, setting down her bag. "We'll figure out what works." Alexander nodded, though the word temporary unsettled him more than he expected. He had always believed permanence was something you built deliberately. Now he was learning it could be something you earned slowly. The children explored with mixed reactions. Lena wandered quietly, cataloging the space with thoughtful eyes. Elliot hovered near the edges, clearly overwhelmed. Ava stood still in the living room, arms wrapped around herself, absorbing the scale of everything. Noah bounced from room to room, energy rising with every new discovery. Emma stayed close to Alexander, her small hand occasionally brushing his, as if grounding herself. Naomi moved through the house like a guest, not an owner. She did not comment on the art, the furniture, the expensive neutrality of the space. She focused instead on the practical bedrooms, bathrooms, proximity, light. "They shouldn't be spread out," she said. "Not yet." Alexander agreed immediately. "We'll keep them close." That night, dinner was catered. Alexander had not thought about it. Ordering food had always been the simplest solution. The children picked at it politely, their forks hesitant, unfamiliar with flavors meant to impress rather than comfort. Marcus pushed his plate away. Naomi noticed. "What's wrong?" "It doesn't taste like food," Marcus said. Noah snorted. Ava lowered her eyes. Alexander felt something tighten. He dismissed the staff without a word and stepped into the kitchen. "I'll cook," he said. Naomi blinked. "You cook." "Not well," he admitted, "but I can learn." The meal was simple: pasta, too much sauce, bread slightly burned. The children ate that night. Alexander lay awake in a house that had never felt empty until now. He listened for sounds, movement, whispers, the soft reassurance of Naomi's voice down the hall. The walls seemed to hum with unfamiliar energy, as if resisting the presence of something human. In the morning, the tension revealed itself more clearly. Elliot retreated entirely, overwhelmed by the open spaces. Ava grew quiet, her emotions dampened by the sheer scale of the house. Marcus bristled at the lack of rules he could push against uncertainty, making him sharper, not calmer. "You don't have to impress us," Marcus said bluntly when Alexander asked if everything was okay. Alexander paused. "I know." "Then stop trying," Marcus replied. The words stung because they were accurate. Alexander had spent his life building environments that projected control. This house did not know how to be lived in. It knew how to be admired. Naomi confronted him that afternoon. "They don't need this," she said quietly, standing in the vast living room. "They need safety, familiarity, corners that don't echo." "I thought," Alexander began. "I know what you thought," she interrupted gently. "But families don't form in open spaces. They form in shared ones." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "We'll change it." Naomi studied him. "That's not something you outsource." "I won't," he said. And he didn't. Over the next days, the house transformed not through renovation, but through presence. Furniture was rearranged, rugs added. The television moved closer to the couch. One wall became a place for drawings, crooked and unapologetic. The children chose their rooms together, arguing, compromising, claiming space. Alexander let them. He learned quickly that rules mattered not as restrictions, but as anchors. Bedtimes were set. Meals were shared at the table. Phones stayed away during dinner. Promises were kept. Money was not used as a shortcut. There were setbacks. Noah threw a tantrum when told he couldn't swim alone. Ava shut down after overhearing a staff member refer to her as one of the kids. Elliot refused to sleep unless the door was left open, light spilling in like a promise. Alexander adjusted. He sat on the floor with Noah until the anger passed. He fired the staff member quietly but firmly. He placed a small lamp in Elliot's room and left it on all night. One evening, Marcus exploded. "You don't get to decide things like you own us," he shouted. Alexander did not raise his voice. "I don't own you." "Then stop acting like it." Alexander took a breath. "I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to protect you." Marcus's voice cracked. "People say that before they leave." The room went silent. Naomi stepped forward instinctively. But Alexander shook his head gently. "I'm still here," he said, "and I plan to be." Marcus stared at him, disbelief warring with hope. Later that night, Naomi found Alexander sitting alone in the darkened living room. "They're afraid," she said softly. "So am I," he admitted. She sat beside him. "Fear doesn't make you weak. Avoiding it does." He looked at her, something unspoken stretching between them. "I don't know how to do this without hurting them." Naomi met his gaze steadily. "You can't guarantee that. You can only guarantee that you won't disappear afterward." The days settled into rhythm. School runs, homework at the kitchen island, movie nights with arguments over popcorn. Slowly, the house softened. The walls stopped feeling like barriers and began to feel like shelter. One evening, Emma climbed into Alexander's lap, unprompted, curling into him with the unthinking trust of a child who felt safe. Naomi watched from across the room, her heart tightening. This was not the life either of them had planned, but it was becoming real. And Alexander understood now. The greatest obstacle was not the past, not the scandal, not the world watching from the outside. It was learning how to turn a house built for one man into a home built for 7 souls. And for the first time, he was willing to let the walls come down. The night it happened began like any other. Homework lay scattered across the kitchen island. The television murmured softly in the background. A cartoon none of the children were truly watching. Naomi folded laundry on the couch, while Alexander stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup that smelled comfortingly familiar now. Ordinary. That was what unsettled him later, the fact that nothing had warned them. Noah was the first to break the rhythm. "I forgot my jacket," he announced suddenly, already halfway toward the door. Alexander glanced at the clock. "It's cold. I'll get it." But Noah was quick, always quicker than expected. He darted outside, barefoot, the night air sharp against his skin. "Hey, wait," Alexander called, dropping the spoon. The sound that followed was small, not dramatic, just a thud, sharp enough to fracture the air. Then silence. Alexander was at the door in seconds. The driveway lights revealed Noah crumpled near the edge of the steps, his face pale, eyes wide with shock. A bike lay on its side, wheels still spinning. Time slowed. Naomi was suddenly beside him, her voice steady, even as fear tightened every line of her body. "Call an ambulance." Alexander's hands shook as he dialed. He pressed a towel against Noah's head, his mind screaming for control it could not find. "I'm here," he said, though he wasn't sure who he was reassuring. "I've got you." Noah's breathing was uneven, his small fingers clenched in Alexander's sleeve. "Don't go," he whispered. The words tore through him. "I won't," Alexander said hoarsely. "I promise." The hospital lights were too bright, too indifferent. Alexander paced the waiting room while Naomi spoke calmly with doctors, answering questions with the efficiency of someone who had learned to hold herself together in crisis. The other children sat, huddled together, fear etched across their faces. Marcus tried to be brave, standing between the younger ones like a shield. Lena clutched Ava's hand tightly. Elliot stared at the floor, unmoving. Emma sobbed quietly into Naomi's coat when she returned. Alexander had never felt so useless. Money meant nothing here. Influence meant nothing. The world did not bend to his will. When the doctor finally approached, Alexander braced himself as if for impact. "He's stable," the doctor said. "Concussion, broken arm. He's going to be fine." Alexander exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His knees nearly gave out. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "Can we see him?" They were led into the room, one by one. Noah lay pale against the white sheets, his arm in a cast that seemed far too large for his small body. His eyes fluttered open when Alexander approached. "You stayed," Noah murmured. Alexander sat beside him, carefully taking his uninjured hand. "I said I would." Noah squeezed weakly. "Okay." The simple trust of that moment shattered something inside Alexander. He had faced disasters before: market crashes, hostile takeovers, public humiliation. None of them had frightened him the way this did, because this time, loss was not theoretical. It had a name. After the children were settled and the night deepened, Alexander stepped into the hallway. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. He leaned against the wall, his breath shallow, chest tight. He slid down slowly until he was sitting on the floor. Naomi found him there minutes later. She did not speak at first. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I thought I was going to lose him," Alexander said finally. His voice broke on the word lose. Naomi nodded. "I know. I didn't know I could feel this," he admitted. "This fear. It's paralyzing." She turned to him then, her eyes gentle but firm. "This is what it means to love them." He looked at her, raw and unguarded. "How did you do it alone?" She hesitated. "I didn't. I just pretended I could." Alexander closed his eyes, shame flooding him. "I should have been there." Naomi's voice softened. "You are now?" The words steadied him more than any reassurance could have. When they returned to Noah's room, Marcus stood rigid at the door. "Is he going to die?" Marcus asked, voice flat with terror. Alexander knelt in front of him, meeting his eyes. "No," he said. "He's hurt, but he's going to heal." Marcus swallowed hard. "People always say that." "I'm not people," Alexander replied quietly. "I'm here." Marcus searched his face, looking for cracks. He found none. Later, as dawn crept through the hospital windows, Emma climbed into Alexander's lap without asking, her small body trembling. "You're shaking," she whispered. "So are you," he replied. They stayed that way, holding each other as the world slowly resumed its shape. When Noah was finally discharged, days later, the house in California felt different. Not lighter, heavier, as if the walls themselves remembered. Alexander installed nightlights, added railings, locked doors more carefully. But beneath the practical changes was something deeper. A shift. He had crossed an invisible threshold. That night, after the children were asleep, Naomi found him standing in the backyard, staring up at the dark sky. "I can't protect them from everything," he said without turning. "No," she agreed. "You can't." He turned to her, eyes bright with unshed emotion. "But I can stay." Naomi held his gaze. "That's all they're asking." In the quiet that followed, Alexander understood something with devastating clarity. This was no longer about making things right. It was about being present when things went wrong. And nothing, no power, no ambition, no fear would ever be enough to pull him away again. The world did not knock before entering. It never did. It slipped in through notifications, through whispered conversations that turned sharp at the edges, through a single photograph taken too far away to be kind. Alexander learned this at 6:30 on a quiet morning, standing barefoot in the kitchen while coffee brewed and the house slept. His phone vibrated once, then again, then relentlessly. He didn't need to look to know what it meant. Instinct, the same one that had warned him in Chicago, tightened in his chest. Naomi appeared in the doorway, hair loose, robe wrapped around her, already reading the answer on his face. "It's happening," she said. He nodded. They found it. The article was careful at first, neutral language, phrases like sources suggest and unconfirmed reports. It referenced an investigation into unethical research practices, hinted at sealed settlements, and ended almost casually with a line that shattered privacy into pieces. Alexander Wright is believed to have fathered 6 children connected to the case. By noon, restraint was gone. Headlines sharpened. Photos surfaced, grainy images of Naomi and the children taken outside the hospital. Noah's cast visible beneath his sleeve. Comment sections filled with opinions that felt more like verdicts. Some were curious, some sympathetic. Many were cruel. Naomi closed her laptop slowly. Her face was calm, but Alexander knew that stillness. It was the kind she used when the world demanded more strength than anyone should have to give. "They're already outside," she said. He listened. The distant hum of cars, the subtle, predatory patience of people waiting for a story to bleed. Alexander's legal team called, then his board, then investors. Voices layered over one another, urgent and precise. Each one focused on containment. Deny paternity. Distance yourself from the woman. Protect the brand. Alexander ended the call, mid-sentence. He turned to Naomi. "I'm not hiding them." Her gaze held his, steady but searching. "Once you say that out loud, there's no going back." "I know." She hesitated. "Are you ready for what it will cost?" He thought of Noah in a hospital bed, of Emma curled into his lap, of Marcus watching him for the slightest sign of retreat. "Yes," he said. The children sensed the tension immediately. Marcus stood at the window, watching the street. "Are those people here for us?" "Yes," Naomi said gently. Lena frowned. "Did we do something wrong?" Alexander crossed the room in 2 strides. He knelt in front of her, his voice firm, unyielding. "No, you did nothing wrong. None of you did. But they're angry," Noah said quietly. Alexander swallowed. Some people get angry when they don't understand things. That doesn't make them right. Ava pressed herself closer to Naomi. "Are we in trouble?" Naomi wrapped an arm around her. "No, sweetheart. We're just being seen." Emma tugged on Alexander's sleeve. "Will they make you leave?" The question cut deeper than any headline. He met her eyes. "No," he said. "No one gets to make that decision." The decision came sooner than expected. By afternoon, the pressure was suffocating. A major shareholder threatened to pull funding. A board member demanded an emergency meeting. The implication was clear: distance himself from the scandal. or be removed from leadership. Alexander stood alone in his study, the glass walls reflecting his own image back at him, perfectly composed, perfectly isolated. The man he had been would have calculated the losses, would have sacrificed the few to save the whole, would have called it rational. Instead, he picked up the phone and called a press conference. Naomi found him as he was preparing to leave. "You don't have to stand in front of them," she said. "I can—" "No," he replied. "You shouldn't have to." She studied him, her voice soft but resolute. "They will tear you apart. I know. And they'll never stop watching." "I know," he said again. She reached for his hand, squeezing once. "Then do it for the right reason." "I am," he said, "for them." The press room was chaos. Cameras, shouted questions, the sharp electricity of people sensing blood in the water. Alexander stepped to the podium alone. He did not smile. He did not deflect. He spoke plainly. "There has been unethical research conducted under systems I helped create," he said. "I take responsibility for that failure." The room stilled. "I am the biological father of 6 children," he continued. "They were not born from deception or betrayal, but from abuse of scientific power. They are not a scandal. They are not an error." A reporter shouted, "Are you stepping down to protect your image?" Alexander shook his head. "I'm stepping down to protect my family." Gasps rippled through the room. "My children did not choose this," he said. "But I choose them. Publicly. Permanently." When the footage aired, Naomi watched from the living room. The children gathered around her. Marcus stared at the screen, jaw tight. He didn't lie. Marcus said. Lena nodded slowly. He didn't look scared either. Emma smiled. He said, "My children." Noah leaned back, exhaling for the first time all day. When Alexander returned home, the house was quiet. The reporters had been pushed back. Security had tightened. Naomi met him at the door. "It's done," he said. She searched his face. "Are you okay?" "No," he admitted, "but I'm clear." That night, the children slept uneasily, dreams interrupted by noise outside, by unfamiliar tension in the air. Alexander moved from room to room, checking doors, adjusting blankets, leaving lights on. In Marcus's doorway, he paused. "Are you really not leaving?" Marcus asked quietly. Alexander met his gaze. "I already left the thing that could take me away from you." Marcus nodded once. It was enough. Later, Alexander and Naomi stood together in the dim kitchen. "You gave up everything," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, I let go of the wrong things." She looked at him, then, not with nostalgia, not with caution, but with something new. Respect layered with tenderness. The world had found out. Judgment would come. Consequences would follow. But inside the walls of a house that finally felt like a home, something unbreakable had taken root, and for the first time, Alexander Wright did not feel exposed. He felt anchored. The house learned a new rhythm after the world found out. It wasn't quieter, if anything. It was louder. Phones rang more often. Security moved with measured precision. Naomi learned which blinds to draw at which hours. But beneath the surface noise, something steadier took hold. Routine. Alexander woke before dawn now. Not to emails or market reports, but to the soft certainty that mornings mattered. Breakfast mattered. Being seen mattered. He learned the art of small things. He learned that Marcus needed space before school. Silence, more than reassurance. That Lena preferred her questions answered honestly, even when the answers were complicated. That Elliot thrived when allowed to retreat without being labeled distant. That Noah needed movement walks, throwing a ball, burning off the nervous energy that fear had sharpened. That Ava listened more than she spoke, and felt everything twice as deeply. That Emma believed in him with a simplicity that was both gift and responsibility. Alexander began to understand that love was not a single emotion. It was a practice. There were still days when the weight of what he had given up pressed against him. Meetings he no longer attended. Decisions made without his voice. News cycles that twisted facts into spectacle. But each time the doubt surfaced, it was answered not by conviction, but by presence. By Noah slipping his hand into Alexander's as they crossed the street. By Lena announcing, casually, "Dad says we should check our sources," during a homework debate. By Elliot leaving a book on Alexander's desk without explanation. A quiet invitation. The word "Dad" arrived unevenly. Emma said it first, without ceremony, as if it had always been there. Ava followed weeks later, tentative, but sincere. Lena used it selectively, testing the sound of it in moments that mattered. Elliot did not say it at all, but began standing closer, asking for help, staying. Marcus resisted the longest. Alexander did not push. One afternoon, Marcus slammed his backpack down harder than necessary, anger sharp and immediate. "They're still talking," he snapped. "At school. About us." Alexander nodded. "I know. You don't." Marcus shot back. "They say you're only here because you got caught." The words landed like a blow. Alexander did not defend himself. He did not explain. He sat down across from Marcus, his voice calm. "What do you think he asked?" Marcus hesitated, his hands clenched, then loosened. "I don't know." "That's okay." Alexander said, "You don't owe me certainty or forgiveness." Marcus's voice dropped. "Everyone leaves." Alexander leaned forward. "I'm not everyone." Marcus looked at him, then really looked. The bravado faltered. "You don't get to promise that." Marcus whispered, "I know." Alexander replied, "So I won't promise. I'll prove it." The shift between Alexander and Naomi was quieter, more complex. They had moved past history into something uncharted. Shared responsibility bound them more tightly than romance ever had. They disagreed sometimes about discipline, about boundaries, about how much of the outside world to let in. But they listened. Late at night, after the house finally slept, they sat together in the kitchen, speaking in low voices about fears they rarely named aloud. "I don't want them growing up defined by this," Naomi said once, staring into her tea. "By headlines, by other people's opinions. They won't." Alexander said, "Not if we teach them who they are." She studied him. "You've changed. So have you." He replied gently. She smiled faintly. "I had to." One evening, a letter arrived. No return address. Just Marcus's name on the envelope. Alexander found him sitting on his bed. Letter unfolded. Expression tight. "They want to interview me," Marcus said flatly. "They say my voice matters." Alexander sat beside him. "It does." Marcus swallowed. "Do I have to?" "No." Alexander said immediately. "You never have to." Marcus exhaled slowly, relief softening his shoulders. "Okay." After a long pause, Marcus added, "But if I ever want to say something, will you back me?" Alexander met his eyes. "Always." That night, Marcus stood in the doorway of Alexander's study, hesitant. "Hey," Alexander said quietly. Marcus shifted his weight. Do you want to come to my game tomorrow? I wouldn't miss it." Alexander replied. Marcus nodded once, then hesitated again. "Dad." The word was barely audible. Alexander felt it move through him like a steadying force. "Yes," he answered, "at the game." Alexander sat in the bleachers, cheering too loudly, clapping too often, utterly unconcerned with appearances. Naomi watched from beside him, something like wonder in her eyes. When Marcus scored, he looked straight at Alexander and smiled. Later that night, as the house settled into sleep, Naomi stood beside Alexander on the balcony. "They see you now?" she said. "I hope so," he replied. "They trust you." Alexander turned to her. "Do you?" Naomi considered the question with care. "I trust who you're choosing to be." He nodded. "That's fair." There was no dramatic reunion, no sweeping declarations, just two people standing in the quiet aftermath of storms they had survived differently but together. Inside, 6 children slept, each carrying fewer fears than before. Alexander understood something now that he hadn't before. Being a father was not about biology. It was not about sacrifice. It was not about perfection. It was about choice. And every day, in 1,000 small ways, he chose them. Not because he had to, but because there was no other life he wanted. 1 year later, the house no longer felt like a place that needed guarding. The security gates were still there. The cameras still watched the perimeter. But inside, the air had changed. It moved freely now, carrying laughter, arguments, music, the quiet hum of a life that had learned how to exist without bracing for impact. Alexander woke to sunlight spilling across the kitchen table and the sound of voices overlapping in familiar chaos. "Noah, that's my mug. You left it. That doesn't mean it's yours." Alexander smiled to himself before he even opened his eyes. This was how mornings began now, not with urgency, not with dread, but with presence, with the knowledge that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He joined them in the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves automatically. "Pancakes?" he asked. Emma beamed. Ava nodded eagerly. Lena raised an eyebrow, already evaluating technique. Marcus leaned against the counter, pretending not to care. Elliot closed his book. That alone felt like a victory. Naomi watched from the doorway, coffee in hand. Her expression soft, in a way that would have startled her a year ago. There was no tension in her posture now, no quiet vigilance. She trusted the space, trusted him, trusted them. Later that day, they gathered in the backyard, a patch of grass no magazine would ever feature. dotted with chalk drawings and half-deflated balls. Noah practiced throwing. Marcus corrected him with exaggerated seriousness. Ava braided Emma's hair, while Lena narrated a story she was determined to write down later. Elliot sat on the steps, reading, close enough to be part of it without needing to perform. Alexander stood beside Naomi, watching. "I never imagined this," he said quietly. Naomi smiled. "That's usually how it happens." The scandal had faded, slowly, imperfectly. There were still whispers, still opinions, but they had learned to let the world speak without letting it decide who they were. Alexander had built something new, not a company, not an empire, but a foundation. He advised quietly now, invested ethically, spoke publicly only when it mattered. His name no longer commanded fear or awe. It commanded something else: respect. That evening, after the children were asleep, Naomi found Alexander in the living room, sorting through old photos. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Trying to remember who I was," he replied. She sat beside him. "Do you miss him?" He considered the question honestly. "No," he said. "I understand him, but I don't miss him." Naomi nodded. He did his best with what he knew. "So did you," Alexander said. She looked at him then, really looked at the man who had learned to bend without breaking, to choose without fear, to love without needing control. "You stayed," she said softly. "Yes," he replied. "I did." Silence settled between them, not empty, but full. "I never planned a family." Alexander continued. "I thought planning was how you made things last." Naomi smiled. "Families last because people choose each other, over and over." He turned toward her. "I choose you." She did not answer immediately, not because she doubted him, but because she understood the weight of the moment. "I choose you too," she said at last, "not because of the past, because of now." The next morning, the children gathered in the living room, their curiosity unmistakable. Emma climbed onto the couch. "Mom, Dad, are you being weird again?" Naomi laughed. Alexander cleared his throat. "There's something we want to ask you," Naomi said. Marcus crossed his arms. Suspicious. "Are we moving again?" Alexander said quickly, "Never again without a family vote." That earned a few nods. Alexander took a breath. "We were wondering how you'd feel about staying exactly like this, together." Officially, Lena tilted her head. "You already are." Marcus studied their faces. "You mean, like for real?" Naomi nodded. "For real?" Noah grinned. Ava smiled shyly. Elliot looked up from his book, eyes thoughtful. Emma clapped. "Good. I already told everyone." Marcus huffed, but his smile betrayed him. "Fine," he said. "But I get the big room." Alexander laughed. Negotiations start after breakfast. That night, as Alexander tucked Emma into bed, she wrapped her arms around his neck. "You didn't leave," she murmured sleepily. He kissed her forehead. "I won't." In the hallway. Marcus waited, hands shoved into his pockets. "Hey," Alexander said. Marcus hesitated. "You know, if you ever mess up, I will," Alexander said gently. Marcus nodded. Just don't disappear. Alexander met his eyes. I won't. Marcus leaned forward, hugging him quickly, awkwardly, before stepping back. Good night, Dad. Alexander stood there long after the door closed, heart full in a way no success had ever given him. In the quiet of the house, Naomi slipped her hand into his. You okay? She asked. Yes, he said. I think this is what winning feels like. She smiled. It is. The man who once measured life in numbers now measured it in moments. Morning light, shared meals, arguments that ended in laughter, silence that felt safe. Alexander Wright had not planned this life, but he had chosen it. And in choosing them 6 children, 1 woman, 1 imperfect, beautiful family, he had finally found the thing he never knew he was missing. Not power, not legacy, home.